Nailing your draft picks is so critical, but what is even more important is avoiding those landmines. We are going to run through 4 offenses you want to be avoiding in this year's redraft season. The first one, Tom, the Pittsburgh Steelers. It just feels like there's so many question marks. Who's going to start under center? What's the wide receiver depth behind George Pickens? Do we really want to have any part of an offense that's got Arthur Smith calling plays? Where do we start?
Well, I mean, I'll caveat this by saying I'm in on the run game, but not the passing game. So let's start with the passing game, because the offensive line will be better than it was last year, which should allow them to do a little bit more, both in the run and the passing game. But Russell Wilson, I can't get on board with Russell Wilson. I can't get on board with Justin Fields. And yes, you can say, okay, Russell Wilson wasn't as bad as the numbers made out last year, that Sean Payton and him was just a marriage that was never going to work. Okay, but Russell Wilson was also just pretty bad at times. Justin Fields, yes, he got injured. He was doing some good stuff, but also the Bears gave up on him. Like, nobody else around the league seemed interested in having Justin Fields. There were teams who needed quarterbacks who could bring upside to their offense, and nobody seemed interested in him, to the point where he's now on the Steelers as a backup quarterback. Maybe he ends up starting games. I would expect both these quarterbacks to end up starting games at certain points, but I don't know what it is that either quarterback does that's particularly good. You look at the wide receiver room. We know that George Pickens is going to be boom or bust. Through 2 seasons in the NFL, Pickens has 7 top 12 weekly finishes in half-point PPR, but he also has 17 finishes as wide receiver 40 or worse. Those are lineup killing weeks. Those are the weeks which, that's when you lose. When you started somebody like that and you're sitting and looking at, he finished wide receiver 45. Seriously? So Pickens, yes, now he's got a clearer path to volume because Deontay Johnson's out of town, and we both love Deontay Johnson and his ability to earn volume. But what Pickens does is Pickens likes those highlight reel plays. He likes to be used on the boundary, and there's some whispers that he's going to be used more from the slot. But Russell Wilson hasn't been good at targeting the middle of the field. So unless he's running out breakers or stuff like that, is it going to be good? And that's the same reason I can't get on board with Pat Freiermuth, because Russell Wilson, being a shorter quarterback, struggles to see over the offensive line, struggles to target the middle of the field. And it's been that way for quite a while. So I'm not interested in George Pickens at cost. I'm not interested in Pat Freiermuth at cost. Then you go wide receiver. Do they even know who their wide receiver 2 is? Because latest reports suggest that it could be Van Jefferson, who has had only 1 season over 380 yards in his career. The last couple of years, he's been used more as a deeper threat with an average depth of target over 16. So that doesn't feel good. You look at the Falcons last year. They were dead last in pass rate over expected by a mile, and that was Arthur Smith running that offense. The Steelers, they ranked 29th. So even if Arthur Smith is forced to play a little bit faster, we really expecting them to take a jump. And if you're not playing at a fast rate, you're not scoring lots of fantasy points, this is going to be a run-heavy offense, which is fine because I like both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris at cost. But outside of that, I want nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it feels like this is like a bunch of arranged marriages that just don't work at all. Like, you can tell yourself a story of how things are going to work. You know, when Arthur Smith got appointed the OC for the Steelers, I like, this is fantastic news for George Pickens, because George Pickens is a beast on those in-breaking routes. We know he can go outside. We know he's good at those kind of deep sideline catches. But where he needs to improve is those, he's a big body in breaking routes, and that is what Arthur Smith has done fantastically. You think back to A.J. Brown with the Titans on those kind of slants and ins and things like that. That was amazing. But then you've got Russell Wilson at quarterback, who, as you said, is one of the worst at completing passes in the middle of the field. You've then got Pat Freiermuth, who's, you know, a decent tight end, stretching those seams and things like that. And then you combine that with the quarterback who attempted more passes behind the line of scrimmage than any quarterback in the NFL last year. Russell Wilson is a deep outside or check down quarterback, and there's not much intermediate. And it's kind of like none of it adds up. None of it makes sense. And it's just like, I don't really want to project this much into an offense when, let's be honest, week 4, if the Steelers are 1-3 or something ridiculous, it's probably going to all change because then Justin Fields comes in and starts under center. So I want no part of this offense. As you said, I quite like Jalen Warren just because I think with Russell Wilson, there's going to be a huge amount of check downs. I'm less excited about Najee Harris than potentially you are. I just don't want to touch it.
So Najee Harris to play there is for Arthur Smith has always liked the big-bodied backs around the goal line. But yeah, my preference is Jalen Warren because, as you mentioned, Russell Wilson checks down. Like I keep banging out this stat that Russell Wilson led the league in check down rate when kept clean. So when he wasn't pressured last year, he was at 19%. The next closest quarterback to him was Justin Fields at 13%. So like either way, yes, it might be schematic to a point, but either way, there's going to be a lot of PPR volume to running backs. And I think Jalen Warren is the guy that's suited to the most.
We're moving on from Russell Wilson's current team to Russell Wilson's previous team, the Denver Broncos. Look, Sean Payton has come in, thrown his weight around, got rid of Russell Wilson, has appointed his quarterback of the future in Bo Nix. Is this just destined to be the worst team in the NFL this year?
I can believe it. I think the one thing they've kind of got going for them is that the offensive line looks better. Like last year, you were talking about one of the very like bottom few offensive line units, but now I think you're probably talking about, maybe pushing top 20 unit. So perhaps that gives Bo Nix time to check down from the pocket because that's what we're expecting him to do. He's going to replace Russell Wilson, but it's kind of hard to get over the fact that the Broncos reached massively on Bo Nix. Going back to the NFL draft, nobody expected Bo Nix to be a top 15 pick. And part of this gets thrown out because the Falcons were absolutely crazy and took Michael Penix where they did. But Bo Nix, the Broncos knew that they either had to take him or they weren't going to get him because they didn't have a second round pick. They couldn't manage to swing a trade. I guess you can tell yourself an upside story that, okay, well, Bo Nix has Troy Franklin. And when you go and look at Bo Nix highlights, most of them are Troy Franklin highlights as well. Like Troy Franklin can flash some upside. So perhaps there's some possible situation there. But the one thing I keep going back to with the Broncos is the vibes are horrendous around this team. Like who wants to be there? Cortland Sutton wants more money. Patrick Surtain has had constant trade rumors around him for a little while. Sean Payton doesn't even really seem to want to be there himself. Like, I know he's a miserable guy at the best of times, but he doesn't seem to be enjoying it. They played slow last year, and part of that was Sean Payton putting the reins on Russell Wilson. They ranked 27th in pace, 26th in play clock seconds. So they were low volume slogs. They produced the 5th fewest combined snaps, only 39 total points per game after week 5. So I just find it really difficult. And the one area you might be able to go, okay, well, Sean Payton always has running backs who produce well in PPR formats because they're featured so much as part of the offense. Well, which one is it? Because there's Javonte Williams, who looked pretty average last year coming off the ACL injury. There's Jaleel McLaughlin, who looked surprisingly good. There's Samaje Perine, who Sean Payton loved in free agency and then didn't seem to love as soon as he got there. There's Audric Estime, who the team drafted this year. And then there's your guy, Blake Watson. I don't know how I'm supposed to play this backfield. I don't know how I'm supposed to play the wide receivers with Mims, Franklin, Josh Reynolds. Greg Dulcich seems to be out of favor. And it's just easier for me to stay away.
Yeah, I really like some of these options in this offense for 2-3 years down the line. I like them as dynasty assets. I think Audric Estime, Blake Watson, Troy Franklin have all got decent potential. But for redraft this year, I don't want any part of them because I just don't know what this offense is going to be. I don't know who's going to stand up. And I just think that, Bo Nix is the most experienced college quarterback ever. No college quarterback has started more games than he has. But I don't necessarily see that as a good thing because there's a reason why he had to stay in college for 5 years and couldn't declare before that. So, not super excited. And I think, let's be honest, if there's a real world where the Broncos are picking 101 overall in the 2025 draft. But before we move on to the next offense, if you are here, hit that subscribe button. We are fast approaching the NFL season. Of course, that means redraft, but we have got Dynasty, Best Ball, and of course, in season, we'll have Tom's DFS takes for you as well. We're going to spend some more time in the AFC North. The Cleveland Browns. Does this just rest 100% on, is Deshaun Watson ever getting back to Houston Texans, Deshaun Watson?
Yeah, perhaps he doesn't even need to get back to that point. I mean, if you could get league average quarterback play, if you could get Derek Carr level play at Deshaun Watson, would that make the Browns a good offense? Because since the Browns opted to give Deshaun Watson a $230 million fully guaranteed contract, he's earned $92 million, thrown 341 passes across 12 games for 14 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. People will tell you that Deshaun Watson was starting to find some level of form last year before his shoulder injury. Scored over 19 fantasy points in 3 games. But those games came week 1 against the Bengals, who were a mess, who allowed the most explosive plays in the league last year, right around that top end of the category. The Titans, who you targeted through the air in DFS, Redraft, Dynasty, everywhere you could. If you were playing against the Titans, you didn't really want to start running backs against them, but you wanted to start pass catchers against them. And then also the Cardinals, whose defense, if you could name more than 2 or 3 defensive players on the Cardinals, then you must be pretty deep into IDP. So much of it comes back to Deshaun Watson. It's going to be a new offense. We know that the one thing that you can say about this team is they're going to have a good offensive line, probably a top 5 unit or worse. But now Alex Van Pelt is out. He's with the Patriots as offensive coordinator. Ken Dorsey is now the offensive coordinator for the Browns, who was fired from Buffalo. So what is it this team wants to do? Are they really pushing their chips in on one last push for Deshaun Watson before they figure out if they just have to cut bait because this is a guy who isn't ever going to be worth the money they're paying him? When if you had Derek Carr or, somebody slightly better than Derek Carr, could you be a Super Bowl team? I think it's very likely because there are so many elite level players on this roster. As far as the wide receivers go, I think Amari Cooper will end up getting some more money put into his contract, and you can draft him with a fair level of confidence that he's going to be okay. He's shown that the in-dome, out-of-dome splits are kind of a thing of the past. There's still some funky on and off splits with when he's playing home and away, but he just has a habit of having those massive blow-up weeks that are worth it. Outside of him, Jerry Jeudy, I don't want a piece of it. I'm not interested. David Njoku had most of his big games with Joe Flacco. I think you can kind of lean into it if you have to, but I'd rather take Njoku if he fell past ADP. At the running back position, I do not care if Nick Chubb is squatting 560 pounds. On our weekly Underdog Best Ball streams, Tyler mentioned that squats is one of the easiest exercises to get back to full strength at after an ACL injury. It's the cutting, it's the change of direction, the running at full speed. That's the stuff that we need to see. Jerome Ford might just be the kind of running back who suits an offense if they're going to spread things out a lot more. So, yeah, I just find it really hard outside of Amari Cooper to buy into any part of this offense.
Yeah, I think the wide receiver room is just weird, isn't it? The Browns have just thrown resources at it, traded for Jerry Jeudy, traded for Elijah Moore, drafted Cedric Tillman, drafted David Bell. Like, they're just throwing resources and resources. And I don't know if they've got wide receiver 2 on the team. It's just wild. I'm a little bit higher on David Njoku than you. I think, he's kind of that Madden level progression as a player. I think it's very weird. You don't often see that sort of linear progression through his career, but every single year he's come back bigger, better. And I think that means more for fantasy than anything. I wouldn't be shocked if he could break into that kind of second tier of tight ends for fantasy this year. Running backs, I just don't want any part of them, quite frankly. I think that if Nick Chubb comes back and he's able to produce, that's absolutely an amazing story. But a guy that's not going to catch passes and has that health concern, I don't really want any part of him in fantasy right now.
Yeah, and just going to the second point on the screen there, Cleveland have the 3rd hardest strength of schedule this year. We know the AFC North is facing a pretty tough strength schedule for both the Ravens, the Browns, and I think even the Steelers. It's only the Bengals who have an easy strength schedule. But I just don't think that the Browns are going to trust Deshaun Watson to throw a lot of pass attempts in games where they're really having to go for it. And we know their defense is going to keep them in games, but I can't see scenarios where Deshaun Watson is being asked to throw 35 times a game. And without that, it becomes really difficult to take shots on any player outside of Amari Cooper and maybe David Njoku.
Yeah, the only positive I think for Deshaun Watson is you mentioned the Ken Dorsey hiring. I think it's really interesting hiring because he is a very different type of coordinator to Kevin Stefanski. And I do wonder, Dorsey's been in a little bit more of that shotgun RPO heavy attack like Deshaun Watson was in Houston. So if we're going to see this offense evolve and turn into a little bit more of a shotgun heavy RPO style offense, that could potentially be good for Deshaun Watson, but I don't think we're going to see Deshaun Watson or Houston Deshaun Watson back anytime soon. But heading back down south, we're going to New Orleans. This offense, yeah, there's some good names there. Yeah, Alvin Kamara is a fantasy star. Yes, Chris Olave is a stud. But for me, it just comes back to this offensive line. It's absolutely abysmal. There are serious concerns. And that's with Ryan Ramczyk potentially playing. He could be retiring. He might not play this year. And if he does, I think it's 5 below average offensive linemen across the board. I am seriously concerned about what this offensive line could be. And I think with Derek Carr, the difference between Derek Carr and Jared Goff is that Derek Carr is probably a better quarterback than Jared Goff, but Derek Carr is scared to take a hit. And therefore, he doesn't stay in the pocket and he gets rid of the ball too quickly. And he isn't able to complete passes. And that's why this offense is, for me, could be one of the worst this year.
Yeah, like when Derek Carr gets in his bag and hits some of those downfield passes, like you can believe, you can see why people believe, but it doesn't happen and he doesn't create enough to the point that, as we got on screen there, he's not even liked by his own fans. There were points in the Superdome last year where he was being booed so loudly that it was really surprising for a team to turn on a player like that. And now the answer supposedly is Clint Kubiak, the new offensive coordinator, who spent a year in San Francisco rehabbing his image after a pretty terrible spell with the Broncos and Nathaniel Hackett. And there seems to be this idea that, okay, Clint Kubiak is going to bring more motion to the Saints. The Saints were, I think, dead last in motion at time of snap last year. And we know when teams run motion plays, it opens up so much more for the offense. But Clint Kubiak, I mean, he basically just hung around Kyle Shanahan. And now we're saying, oh, yeah, he's going to run motion. Everything's going to open up so much more. The offensive line, it is one of the worst in the league. And the running back room, you've got Alvin Kamara, who looked bad last year. The receptions absolutely saved him and made him fantasy viable. But if you were looking at it from a pure rushing perspective, it wasn't pretty. Jamal Williams looks absolutely toast. Kendry Miller, who I don't mind taking in best ball drafts, had very little value last year outside of a week 18 game. So running back room is hard to decipher. It's hard to figure out what you want to do there. And then at wide receiver, we know Chris Olave is a stud. Absolutely love Chris Olave, and I don't mind taking shots on him because I always think that studs shine through. Rashid Shaheed could be good, but who else is there? Like, if you can name 3 wide receivers on the New Orleans Saints outside of them, I'd be surprised because I get as far as A.T. Perry, and then I start having to really think.
Yeah, it's not a deep team. This is what happens when you keep pushing cap into next year, into next year, into next year. Finally, the bill is due. And look, the Saints this offseason didn't push much cap into future years. I think they realized that the end is coming. I think we're going to see a rebuild happen very soon. And it could all blow up and not look very pretty this year. So, yeah, I want no parts of this Saints offense in redraft outside of Chris Olave this year. I think they're all overpriced or they're all too boom bust. Like, yeah, Rashid Shaheed, he had phenomenal weeks last year. He had 4 wide receiver 1 weeks, but good luck trying to guess when they're going to be. The same with Taysom Hill and the same with the running backs. Like, I'm just happy to avoid them.
That's it. It's going to be a complete teardown to the point where you build around Chris Olave and potentially a rookie quarterback, and you have a new head coach in there, somebody who actually has nice things to say about their players, perhaps, as opposed to what's going on there currently. And you then basically just cleanse house on all these overpaid veterans who it would cost too much to cut. So, yeah, I'm very much expecting that a year from now, we have an entirely different conversation about the New Orleans Saints.
100%. Well, that is it. 4 offenses to avoid in 2024. Is there one we missed? Is there one you disagree with? Let us know in the comments below. And of course, hit that subscribe button because we've got plenty more content coming your way.